Welcome to another continuation episode of the DireLands system agnostic dark fantasy campaign setting that I am developing here. Now, my name is Adam, and this episode we will be outlining the DireLands fantasy campaign setting DL6 game system. Now, my entire premise of this, when I started originally, was not to have a game system attached at all. But the more I think about it, I need to provide at least the most bare bones version of a stripped down system so that anyone could jump in. Because let's be honest, if you pick up this book when it's finally out because it's a beautiful cover and you start flipping through the pages and it just looks stunning to you and you just want to have it, well, how are you going to play it unless you already know an existing TTRPG game system? And there's a lot of people who don't know any of them. And so I wanted to create something that was super simple and yet very catered to this world, very tailored specifically to this world. So it calls on a bunch of different games like In Nomine, it calls on Saga System, a touch of Dungeons and Dragons. But ultimately, it's this sort of a hybridization to create its own thing. And I'll get into it all here in just a second. But before we dive in, let's address some of the comments here. So, Darius, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. So, question one, have I considered the ecology of each continent ecoregion, like the main continent most similar to Europe, North America, or other ecoregion in regard to animals you can find? Yeah, so it's very much based around the terrain that you're going to be in. So there are desert regions and mountainous regions and plains regions, and the animals, the flora and fauna that you're going to find there represent those individual regions. Because this is one mass continent, then animals do migrate, and they're going to be versions of them all over in like terrain. So you're going to have some animals that cross boundaries between plains and mountainous or hilly regions, whereas you'll have others that exclusively exist only in swamps, but those creatures will exist in swamps all throughout Fall Est, which is the main continent of DireLands. So, yes, I've thought about it. I haven't detailed out the specific animals to that degree. I want to leave a little bit of leeway and save myself a little bit of a headache trying to do that, because there are just innumerable amounts of animals, insects, and amphibians and fish and all sorts of stuff that I really don't want to have to detail out. I want to leave that for region specific so that any dungeon master or storyteller or narrator or game master can just call on their own experience and throw in whatever they want to throw in for that individual ecosystem here. All right, number two, are the gods distant, active, or walk amongst the people? So I addressed this in the gods episode. The gods they're present as in there's people who worship them. Multiple cultures see the gods in slightly different ways, and they supposedly interact with them in slightly different ways. Like you have your basic idea of a priest or a shaman or a cleric, for example, who does call upon the gods and exhibit some form of power, and I'm going to go into the magic system in this here in a little bit. And so, yeah, there are gods, but they don't walk amongst us. And I was very clear about this in the gods episode, where they're not like the Greek gods, where they dip their fingers in the affairs of mortals. If these gods do truly exist, and it's just not the people's interpretation of natural forces, then they exist in ways that are very atmospheric, ambient, off point. Like they do not get involved at all, full stop. Let's see. So they do not walk amongst people. 3, are gunpowder derivatives present in the world? Yeah, and I think that's inevitable. With any sort of system, mostly fantasy likes to stay away from stuff like that, unless it's steampunk or something like that. In this particular case, it'll be very, very rare. You'll have the more industrial nations like Bressus who may have figured out ways to have like blunderbuss style firearms where it's more of like a rifle that just fires off massive powder and scatter shot. And you'll probably see some of the Locastin, which is a very primitive war-centric society after the Witch Queen took hold of them, they're probably developing stuff very similar to a form of a canon, though it's it's not going to be like modern standard or modern day canons or in the Victorian times or anything like that. It's going to be very primitive, and that's intentional because I want this to be a fantasy. I don't want this to be an industrialized nation or industrialized world. So it's sort of a Victorian, post-Victorian age. I very much want it to be medieval era pushing into Renaissance, depending on where you are. But then equally, if you go to Kalia, for example, it's completely underdeveloped. There are wildly primitive First Nations people there, and they're not going to have any idea about that, and they're not going to even be interested in that. They're very happy with using spears and slings and bows and arrows and stuff like that. And when it comes to warfare, they might put together a form of a trebuchet or a form of a catapult, but realistically, that's just not their culture, and so they're not gonna have that as a nation, So, very rare. So the guns are like matchlock era at best, stupid rare. Yeah, for sure. But that is what's going to differentiate someone who does find one. They're going to have to, one, be able to fix it themselves. So they're going to have to know blacksmithing. They're going to have to know chemistry. They're going to have to be educated and skilled in the trades, or know some people who really, really are. Sort of be funded by these types of people or supplied by these types of people. But I do like the idea that it would be present, because that creates a very special type of a character to sort of walk amongst other people and then pull out this weapon and no one has a clue what it is. It's sort of like Ash Williams going into Army of Darkness in medieval era with his boomstick, the shotgun, like the double barrel Remington shotgun. They're just like blown away. Well, figuratively and literally, no pun intended there, because they don't know what the hell it is. And it can do massive amounts of damage, destroying, in that case, deadites, but, in other cases, humans or animals with a single shot, which is not possible otherwise. So you would be really, really powerful, but you would be very limited in being able to refire and stuff like that, because you just don't have bags of ammo, So anyway, yeah, exactly. This is my boomstick. Any of you primitive... Oh, I can't remember the exact quote. Anyway, I love that film. All right, so let's get into the system breakdown here, because I've been working all day coding up a character sheet for Roll20 so that I could showcase it on this episode. And I'm not done yet. I have a lot more to go through, a lot more development to do, but this sheet does exist. So at least there's that. And I designed it all out based around this system that I'm going to get into now. All right, so the system breakdown is this. It's a DL6 system. That's what it's called, DL6, meaning DireLands, and it uses 6-sided dice. I very much wanted it super basic and simple, so if you didn't have a bag full of dice like most role players do, you could literally just grab like Monopoly and maybe Clue, because most people have board games, and so they're going to have some 6-sided dice somewhere. So you could easily just grab 3 dice and use that as the entirety of the game. Like literally everything. And this isn't play tested yet. I'm going to be play testing it in the future. So, look forward to that. And if you're interested in being a part of that, definitely let me know, because I would definitely be looking for people who, one, want to give it a go and want to try out the campaign world for the first time, but also people who want to kick the tires, find out what's wrong with this system, where it doesn't work. And I've identified some places that are really difficult, but again, that's the whole purpose of playtesting, is to work out the kinks. This is pre-playtest, so keep that in mind. So I'm still working out just the cognitive kinks, as it were. So the DL6 system is intended to be at once familiar and innovative. It blends a simplistic roll high on 3d6 or 3 6-sided dice game mechanic with an innovative ability and trauma system. The more damage you take, the harder it is for you to use your abilities. I never understood why in, for example, Dungeons & Dragons, you could be at 1 hit point and still hit others as hard as you did at full hit points. Meaning there's literally no physical tax taken with the damage toll. You're just walking around at 1 hit point, then you go to 0 and you drop down. Like there's no in between, nothing. So the way that I'm building this entire game system is it's entirely dependent on your health. And it breaks down into 3 primary abilities to make it very, very simple. The 3 abilities represent your physical, mental, and spiritual health. Now, you're going to see a pattern when it comes to DireLands. Everything is in 3s. There's 3 main nations on the continent of Far Lest. There's these 3 main nations are constantly at war with each other. They represent 3 levels of society. When you sort of reflect on what society is in its development cycles, it represents different aspects of the world. And everything is governed by the idea of these 3s, hence the 3 dice in order for the game system to work, and hence the 3 abilities that influence literally everything you do as a character. Each ability also represents the levels of health in that ability, which can be reduced through physical, mental, and spiritual trauma. This will permanently affect the ability score and effectiveness of that ability. So your abilities come into play when you roll the dice, and the more trauma you take, you are using the trauma die in order, or the trauma ability score, and it'll make sense in a second here, in order to successfully have, you add that to your dice roll to get over a difficulty number or to get over an enemy's defense, for example. So physical is the first ability. This ability statistic is for brute strength, agility, and health. Mental statistic or ability, this ability statistic is for intellect, reasoning, and perceptiveness. Let's see, DireLands, woo, looking forward to watching this back later. Well, thanks for stopping in, man. I appreciate it. The rule of 3, one of the oldest concepts of Germanic, Slavic, and Celtic mythology. Yeah, for sure. Also as ancient and essential as the concept of the world tree. Yeah, I mean, it just fit perfectly for this, as I was developing it. So the mental is for intellect, reasoning, and perceptiveness. And then spiritual, this ability statistic is for morale, natural, and cosmic connections. So you would be using your spiritual ability score if you're going to be being empowered by gods or nature, and you're going to use your mental if you're going to be empowered by the cosmos, so different types of magic, for example. Of course, if you're just going to be fighting, then you're going to have your physical. So in order to generate your abilities and improve on them, let's just sort of talk briefly about creating a character. So stats will always have a max of 9, and that's very, very low, and there's a reason for that, because these numbers are used throughout the course, but this is supposed to be a very stripped down basic system. I came up in the Holmes era of D&D box set as a kid, and I liked the simplicity of it. You went to level 3 and that was it for that. You had to go to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons if you wanted to play higher levels than 3. And this is supposed to just be a open the game book and start playing system. If you really want to get into high level type play, there's other systems for that. And it's meant to be system agnostic so that you can import DireLands campaign setting into whatever system you personally prefer to play. And I will be running games in multiple different game systems just to showcase how easy it is to port over and play it in your favorite game system. Hey, Ticking Time, Bob, how you doing, man? All right, so almost as, the world tree, yeah. Okay, so you begin your character with 5 points to distribute between your 3 abilities. There must be at least 1 point added to each ability. Then you will earn 1 experience points per session at the DM's discretion using this system. That means that if you really sort of sat back on your haunches and you really didn't contribute very much to that game session, which, let's be honest, sometimes it happens, well, then you're not going to be given an experience point to further improve yourself later on. But it's meant to be difficult to improve yourself, so it encourages you to engage with the game in order to then get those experience points so that you can then spend them and improve your ability scores. Now, you will earn 1 experience point per session if you contribute to the game. And then in order to improve an ability score, you have to have used it in the session. So if you didn't use any of your spiritual ability score at all in the previous session, then you cannot use your experience points to improve it. You have to use your stuff to improve your stuff. That encourages thinking outside of the box for players. It encourages stretching legs as characters to try different things. So you're not just hacking and slashing. If you really want to improve your spiritual or your emotional or your mental statistics, you have to use them in the game. So I kind of like that idea because it encourages people to think rather than just wait for their turn and act. And then it costs 3 times the current number to improve it 1 point. And then, of course, you go to that next point, and it costs 3 times that number to improve it to the next point. So you can see that it would take a very long time to max out your characters at 9 when each point is, 3 times the price every single time. And, of course, that then gives you a guide of knowing how long a game will last until you reach your cap power, and then how powerful you actually will be in the end. So let's talk a little bit about healing, health, and trauma next, now that we have the stats. And I am going to go through and actually create a character with you guys and showcase this a little bit, but I just want to give you a little bit of background first, So each ability represents the general health of the playing character. With each point of trauma taken, damage, it reduces the ability itself. And it also reduces your overall effectiveness using that. So if you're a soldier, a warrior, and you get cut by a sword and you take 1 damage, well then if you had 3 points in your strength, you now effectively only got 2. And that's going to affect your ability to then attack other people or defend yourself throughout the course of the game. So the more damage you take, the less effective you are at everything. It makes it very, very difficult, and it's intentional because DireLands is supposed to have consequences. That's one of the primary themes of this game setting. Everything has consequences, whether positive or negative, and your choices are what determine the outcome of that. So this also encourages people and players, primarily players, of course, from walking through and just slaughtering everything, because combat has real consequences. Like, not only can you die, but you're less effective with each combat round and each combat encounter. So you have to think, is this worth fighting right now? Do I have to try to use my mental statistics in order to talk my way out of this battle? Do I have to use my spiritual connection in order to use some mystical power in order to, maybe generate a fog for cover, and then you can just sort of escape and flee without them knowing where you are to follow you? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into encounters other than combat. But with most game systems, TTRPG game systems, you don't ever know that because most players just run in and try to kill stuff. And I want to avoid that. And so that's why I sort of developed this in this way. Now, of course, you want to heal after you take damage, right? So for every day of rest, you gain 1 point in each of your 3 abilities, recovering through rest. You can also be healed through the use of nature or cosmic magic, which also accelerates this rate. And so, always keep that in mind as well. But even magic has its limits. So it's not like 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons where you can just keep throwing cantrips all day without any problem, or you have a ton of spells at your beck and call that you can just throw every single day. And we'll get into magic here in a second. Magic is also very challenging. And so if you choose that road, know that you'll be able to be powerful, but it's going to come at a cost. Okay. So what races and what ethnicities are there? Well, everything is in 3s in DireLands, right? So you have your refined races, you have your primitive races, and your adventurous races. Now, when I say races, what I'm really meaning is ethnicity of the races. So you have humans, which have your refined, primitive, and adventurous, representing Bressis, Locastin, and Kalia, respectively, civilized, tribal, and primitive. You have dwarves, which are hill, mountain, and dark. Elves, which are high, wild, and dark. Halfling, which are civilized, tribal, and deep. Gnome, which are mountain, wild, and deep. And half races, like half-elf, half-orc, and half-ogre, which each fall into the line of being a refined, primitive, or adventurous version of those characters. So, for example, If you come from Kalia, one of the primitive regions, and you want to be human, well, you're going to be a primitive human. If you want to be a halfling, you're going to be probably a deep halfling because they don't really dwell in these primitive areas. They prefer to keep to themselves. But if you go to Bressus, which is the much more refined and civilized area, you might find like mountain gnomes or civilized halflings wandering around, sharing their knowledge and learning from other people. It just depends on where you are, and the types of races there are going to be inherently different. Now, that's not to say that you can't have a dark dwarf that decides to go to Bressus and live his life out. It just means that they're going to be rare, and they're going to be seen as less than or different, and that is a stigma that is very, very real. Just like in our own real world, we have stigmas, we have biases, and we have straight up just racism. And while it's not a highlight of this game, it is going to be present because it's inevitable when it comes to interactions between demi-human races. And then, of course, depending on your race, you get a bonus to an ability score. Now, this is stripped down to very low, but it is still present. So for humans, you get a +1 physical. Elves get a +1 spiritual. Dwarves get a +1 physical. Halflings get a +1 mental. Gnomes get a +1 mental. Half races get a +1 physical. So you see it sort of paired off like that. So now that we have our races defined, and now this is also not to say that you can't bring it, like import any other races if you're playing Pathfinder or Dungeons & Dragons, for example. This is just for the DL6 system. This is supposed to be super simple, super stripped down. And so I'm only given a handful of options here, but you can add in whatever you want to color this campaign setting as much as you want. So the classes are referred to as roles, and each role has disciplines. These disciplines are also broken down into that trifecta, the three different refined, primitive, and adventurous versions. So, for example, warriors have knight, barbarian, and swashbuckler. Those are the three variations of the theme. Thieves have rogue, assassin, and tomb raiders. Priests have clerics, shamans, and missionaries, and magi have wizards, sorcerers, and occultists. So you can see, depending on the development of that nation, they refer to these different classes in very different ways. And it's part of what I might think about doing in a future supplement of really fleshing out these. But for now, I'm going to give an artistic interpretation of them and just let it be very simplistic and stripped down. Just to get it out the door. Warriors are going to get a +1 with physical. Thieves are going to get a +1 with physical. Priests are going to get +1 with spiritual. And magi are going to get +1 with mental. So let's talk about the game mechanics and the check systems so that we can understand the actual mechanics of the game. We have the basics of how to create a character, what it means to get your ability points, what those ability scores mean, and how those ability scores actually influence effectiveness. And damage, or trauma, as it's referred to in this system, affects your effectiveness as well. So, well, before I get to the game mechanics here, let me address this in Darius. You remember so many 5e people would be confused or offended when 2 or 3e Ravenloft players had to remind them that non-humans are rare and regarded with suspicion and xenophobia by the human majority. Yeah. I mean, I'm a Dragonlance fan, and it was, racial bias was alive and well in that game system. And I played a whole lot of 2nd edition Ravenloft with some friends. And it was, it's mainly human. It was very odd to run into someone else. And I never understood the mentality of, I want to be this exotic species, but then you try to interact with the rest of society as if you're one of them. And depending on the DM, the society doesn't react with shock and awe and murderous intent or aversion to your rare species. Like there should be, like if you go into a human community as a tiefling, people are going to freak out. They think you're a demon. Like, so naturally there's going to be people who want to just try to get a posse together to kill you. They're going to hire the local constable to come and arrest you or take care of you, or maybe the local knighthood order or something. Like that's the point of having these different demi races, is to showcase how odd some of them are. Now, you get special abilities to offset that in most cases of old school D&D. But yeah, that's one of the things that really bothers me about modern day games, is that everything's just like, well, it doesn't matter what you are. Just apply whatever modifiers you want and you're on your way. Like how is that special? That's boring. It's blasé. The entirety of the outsider system, yeah. All right, so game mechanics. So the whole premise is roll high on 3d6. That's it. The readiness or initiative is determined by the ability score used in the round. So the highest number acts first. So if you have two warriors that are going to swing weapons at each other, the person with the highest strength is going to act first because that's your dexterity, that's your physicality, that's everything wrapped into it, right? So it's really simple like that. You don't roll any dice, and it's meant to be just quick and to the point. So if you have the exact same number, which can happen, especially at lower levels, then it just happens simultaneously. And so you resolve attack and defense, and that's it. Then you go to the next round or to the next person or whatever. So there's different types of checks. There's uncontested checks and there's contested checks. This is nothing new. It has been in every single version of every single game system ever. So I'm not really teaching you anything or telling you anything that you don't already know. But just for the sake of explaining it, roll over the difficulty number is the uncontested check with your ability number plus the 3d6 roll. So if you roll 11 on your 3d6 and you have an ability score of 6, then you have a 17 on your score. That's what you're trying to get over, the difficulty check. If you rolled that 17, then you would get over a challenging difficulty. So the difficulty numbers are pretty simply broken down, and this is ubiquitous, so it's nothing new. 5 is easy, 10 is moderate, 15 is challenging, and 20 is difficult. That's it. So it's that simple. So if you just rolled that 17, you would have done a challenging action of some sort. Now, a contested check means you're going against someone or something else. Those are only the differences. So uncontested means you're just trying to do something, and contested means you're trying to do something against some form of opposition that is more than just the natural world, like trying to jump a chasm or unlock a locked door, for example. So a contested check, you roll over the opposing contested check. So again, it's your ability number plus the 3d6 roll. Whoever gets higher is the one that attacks that round. So, for example, if you have two warriors that are fighting each other, one of them rolls a 16 and the other rolls a 12, well then the 12 doesn't get to attack because he tried to, and the 16 effectively deflected the attack and scored a hit. That's really how simplistic this is broken down. So it's not like everyone gets a turn. It's contested players get to see who actually gets hit, and everyone else gets to act however they want to act if they're not in direct opposition to someone or something else. There are inevitably through playtests going to have to be modifications to this. I acknowledge that, but I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. Each die represents the ability. And this is another thing where everything comes through an interpretation, right? So one of your 3 die represents your physicality. The second of your 3 die references your mental abilities. And the third represents your spiritual abilities. The die result on the represented die is subtracted from the attack damage. So if the guy who just got hit rolled a 5 on his physicality and like 2 1s on the other 2 dice, the mental and spiritual, and he's actually doing physical combat, then whatever damage is done to him, he subtracts 5 from it because he was still effective. He was still like in the fight. He wasn't just standing there waiting to get hit. He was trying to get out of the way, but he just didn't get the hit scored against him. Now, this does mean that in some rare cases, you're going to get hit, but not take any damage. And that's just a reality in combat. Sometimes your attack is riposted or parried off, or they just literally move out of the way and you don't hit them. But if you score against them, maybe you just hit their armor, or maybe you hit their shield and it doesn't take any damage, or they don't incur any trauma or damage from that hit, even though you did score a hit. So we'll just keep going round after round and see what happens, through the course of this. Again, if you do get hit, it's going to lower your overall effectiveness in continuing that fight. So it's not like if you do take 1 damage, for example, and you had a 3 physicality, you now only have a 2 physicality. And so you get less and less effective. And so you're going to want to really consider, how long do I want to keep this fight going? How am I going to end this fight if it's not going well for me? Or how am I going to escape this fight if it's not going well for me? You know, I mean, you have to really think about the longevity of encounters, because not only is it going to end in death, it's going to end in death quickly because you're becoming less and less effective each single round. All right. Let's see. So not only are those, I'm going to sort of jump ahead here to another section because it's germane to the idea of representing each die as one of the ability score representations. Because interpreting the dice is another thing that I really, really loved about tarot cards, for example. Tarot cards, and this is what I stole a little bit from Saga System, is that the color of the card, the content of the card, the title of the card, all of that influences how you interpret what that card means in a given encounter scenario, right? So, for example, if you pull a death card, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to die. It just means the death of a moment or a stage in your life, or, you know, whatever the context is around the conversation, you're going to use that death card to influence it, right? So the same way with the dice. So, for example, physical will represent Bressus as a nation. It also represents invaders and conquerors, physicality, material gain, and brute strength. So if you're rolling your dice and you were successful in doing something, but the physicality die was the highest, well, the storyteller or the narrator or the dungeon master or the game master gets to use that knowledge to help them interpret the outcome. So they're not just making this stuff up whole cloth if they don't want to. They can actually lean on the dice numbers in order to inform how the person was successful. So if, for example, if the mental was really, really high, the highest dice of the 3 that were rolled, they could easily just explain that, you know, you broke through their defenses because you noticed a chink in their armor, you moved out of the way, and you lunged your sword into that broken area. It's just a way to add a little bit of color and flair to an encounter and aiding the storyteller in helping tell a more interesting and intriguing story based on the random rolls of the dice. And so it is important to have 3 different types of dice, or just read the dice in order. And I'll get into that once I show you the character sheet here as well. All right. So mental represents Locastin, or the turned and usurpers, emotional dominance, manipulation, and guile. And so this is all another way to interpret dice as you're rolling them and as you're trying to narrate what happens. Because let's be honest, there's arguably nothing worse in combat when it's just, I roll, I hit, it's 3 damage. Okay, they roll and they attack you. You take 2 damage. Okay, I roll and attack them. They take 1 damage. That's boring as shit. But if you can use the die or just your own ingenuity to come up with some creative ways about how that damage was taken, or why you only did a little bit of damage rather than a lot because your enemy was, you know, very skilled at moving out of the way, or they used the terrain to move around, or they terrified you with their spiritual presence, or maybe their physical presence or something, or maybe their mouth, you know, just smack talking you with their mental dies. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you can interpret it to make it so much more interesting than just, I hit, 3 damage. You know what I mean? All right. So the spiritual one represents Kalia, and this is the first peoples or honorifics. It's the connection to the ancestors and the breath of the world. So that's just the third way of interpreting dice rolls using that specific die, if it's high or low, and that'll sort of give you a step up. All right, so the roll of 3 1s is an automatic failure. The roll of 3 6s is an automatic success, no matter what. Damage is your ability plus the modifier. So it causes trauma, lowering the overall ability score. So if you got like a weapon with a +1 modifier, then you take your ability, your current traumatic ability of strength that, you know, if you were hit before and now you only have 2 out of 3, then you take your 2 physical score, ability score, and then you add the 1 modifier, so you did 3 damage to them. And their physical die roll will subtract from that. So you can see in some cases where it's going to be really high, and in some cases it's going to be really, really low. So it's going to be difficult to really do some significant damage, but hopefully you're always fighting someone that's willing and trained. Otherwise, you're just slaughtering innocents, which I guess you could do too, but that would be kind of messed up. All right. So you can see that everything is a push and pull in this game, in this game system. All right, so let's talk a little bit about magic, because I've broken it down to nature and cosmic. Nature being gods, cosmic being external forces literally in space. In some cases, they're going to be extra-dimensional beings, and in some cases, it's just the cosmos itself that you're harnessing arcane energy from. So, and the same thing with nature magic. You're either pulling it from the gods themselves or the land itself, however you want to see it based on your background, the continent you hail from. That's going to really give you your flair. And magic is very similar to the Saga system version of magic. There's not a list of spells. I mean, I'll probably make some just so that there's some basic knowledge of, oh, well, this is what a healing spell would be if you want to heal X amount. And this is what it would be to cause X amount of damage. Hold on a second. So I'm understanding a lot of basics that you're throwing out so far. You're curious, how is movement handled? Are there range levels instead, like close, near, far? So that's a great question, because I haven't gotten that far. Like I said, this is in progress. And yeah, I think there would be range. I mean, you would be using your physicality as the ability for range. Your strength or your dexterity, your stamina, depending on the type of attack, your ranged attack you're doing. I don't really want it to be super detailed out, to be quite honest. So I would probably say, because movement, there's not like you can move 6 squares or, that other game systems do that. DL6 is really just going to be stripped down. Very theater of the mind, though you can use virtual tabletop. Like AD&D, for example. You didn't really ever worry about movement because you had like 120 feet you could move around if you didn't want to do anything in a round, right? So you could pretty much go wherever you wanted to go in a combat area and attack whomever you want to attack in that combat area without really getting broken down into like how much movement and stuff like that. That's the cue I'm taking from this. So I'm not speccing out movement for any type of different people, and I'm not speccing out distance. But what I will say is that if it seems like it's far away, then I would subtract 1 from your ability score modifier in your attempt. And if it's further out than that, then you're probably not going to be able to hit them in the first place. So there's no real reason to worry about it. So range would very much just be, well, if you're, within, a reasonable distance, well, then just roll straight up. If you're a really far distance, do a -1 to your ability score. But let's just keep it as simple as possible. And that's really going to be the storyteller or DM giving that judgment call. And I don't think players would argue with that. I mean, it has to be contextual and it has to be logical. And, I don't know any DMs personally who would be dicks about it and just be like, no, I'm going to subtract 3 because that's particularly difficult through whatever. Just -1 and we'll see. Ultimately, you want your characters to be heroic. You don't want to be bogged down in minuses or difficulty. You want to be able to say, no, I want to run up the side of this cliff, jump off and throw my spear down at someone. This crazy heroic moment that probably would never happen in real life, but it sounds cool. So yeah, okay, do it. Roll your die. Let's see what happens. And then use the die to explain how it happened, how it worked well or didn't work well, Have some fun. All right, so for magic, again, there is uncontested checks and contested checks. All rolls break down to this very, very simple. Mechanic-wise, it's much more like Final Fantasy fighting where it's side versus other. I'm not familiar with Final Fantasy, to be quite honest. Like, I played the games, like the video games in Nintendo when I was a kid, but nothing else. I'm sort of ignorant about, like, I think there's a role-playing game for it, isn't there? I really don't know. Okay, so magic. Uncontested check. You roll over the effective modifier plus the difficulty of the modifier, the spell itself, with your ability plus a 3 to 6 roll. Very much like an uncontested check for anything else you're trying to do. But you're using the difficulty of the actual spell itself rather than a difficulty number of just like 5, 10, 15, or 20. And I'm going to get in the modifier numbers here. Well, I'll just do it right now. So it depends on the effect. So this is very much broken down between a plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, 3, or 4. And you can see that when you're only doing like 1 to 2 damage per hit, if that, then it's really not going to take a lot to heal that through magic. But the downside is that using magic drains you. And so you have your total spiritual number or your total mental number, depending on the type of magic you're using. And if you're using 1 point to do 1 point of beneficial or negative or harmful spell effect, well, then you just lost 1 point by doing that. And so you can see that there's a natural limit to how much magic you can use before you yourself need to rest and rest up and just sort of recuperate. That way it keeps a very nice balance on the truly awesome power that magic can have in a game world, and forces you to not just rely on your spells. You have to then also rely on other things like your guile and your wits. Sort of like old school magicians, like when you think about Merlin the magician and stuff. I mean, they're not out there throwing fireballs every second. They get exhausted by casting magic because you're harnessing the power of nature or the cosmos. And I really want that to play through in this as well. So if you, for example, have a spiritual score of 3 and you wanted to heal a warrior of 1 of his trauma points, well, then you would have to roll over a 4. That's it. And then it would cost you 1, that extra point that you're healing him for, from your spiritual. You would get 1 point in spiritual trauma, dropping you down to 2. But that warrior took that 1 point and used it to erase 1 of his points of trauma. So it healed him 1 point. So you can see that the modifier directly results in either damage or health. Now that's an uncontested check. So that's someone saying, give it to me, baby. Whatever you got, I'm not going to try to resist. There is a contested check. So in a contested check, you need to roll over the modifier plus the opposing ability. So if they have a spiritual score of 4 and you're using a +2 to do them 2 damage, you have to roll over a 6 to do that 2 damage to them because you're rolling over their defense. And so you roll your 3 to 6, you add your ability, you add the 2 or subtract the 2 if it's, the damage or whatever, and then you determine whether or not you actually hit them or you didn't actually hit them. And the damage taken is the modifier that you used. And then you would have to then subtract that modifier from your total points to indicate your exhaustion from casting the spell. So for every successful attack, you suffer 1 spiritual trauma. If you are not successful, then you do not take that trauma. You just sort of hold on to it because you did not effectively, use it. I'm still sort of wrestling with this in use, and I'm going to have to try it out in play testing to see how it feels and if I have to make modifications to it. Same with the combat system. But this is kind of where I'm starting at. So you can see that everything has consequences and benefits, and you really have to use your head in this campaign world with the DL6 system specifically. All right, let's see. And then equipment, I really love old school Dragon Warrior. It was called Dragon Quest, but when I played it as a kid, it was called Dragon Warrior. And everything was very simple. It was like, you have a sword, and the sword is a regular sword. You don't get any bonuses. If you have a +1 sword, then you get a +1 bonus. And it didn't go much higher than that. You maybe got a +2 or something like that. But in the old school game, it was very stripped down, very simple. And finding magical weapons is very, very difficult. So any weapon in DL6 is going to give you a +1 just by using a weapon. If you use your fists, you get no bonus. You're just using your stat itself. And so you have a benefit. And maybe, there's going to be like expansions where you have training and fighting. And so with that training comes the +1 instead of just using a weapon for your +1. But if you run into magic weapons, which again are rare, then it would be the +2, for example, rather than the +1. But I want to keep it really, really simple and basic. And so that will add into the damage and the modifier that you need to get over the contested roll in order to actually hit them. Armor then would subtract 1. And I'm not breaking it down into types of weapon and types of armor. That's your flair that you want to add to it. So if you want to use a scythe and have banded armor, well, just have a very creative looking and acting character, and let's not get bogged down in the specifics. Again, this is very much, taken from old school style gaming rather than modern version of gaming. But I like the simplicity of it personally, and I know it's not going to be to everyone's taste, and I'm okay with that. All right, I just want to double down a little bit on the interpretation of the dice, because this is a big part. That 3 nations, the 3 levels of development, the 3 forms of your abilities, it plays into everything. And so interpretation of these 3 abilities is incredibly important. And not important as in you have to do it, but it's important as in it adds color to the campaign world, whereas otherwise it would just be another campaign world. Is one of the things that stands out that makes this different and special. So as mentioned previously, each of the 3 DL6 dice represents one of your ability scores, but also one of the 3 nations or themes. And I already talked about the physical, mental, and spiritual, what their themes are. So each of these may be used by the storyteller to help interpret the outcome of a die roll. On a successful type of action, the number gives you the degree of success, while the die itself adds the role-playing note. So if you're trying to cast a spell and you rolled a physical 5, a mental 3, and a spiritual 3, the total is 11, but the physical die is the highest. If you succeeded, then your physical grounding aided you in your success, or perhaps you reflected on the lesson learned by invading tactics, influence your magical working to break through the target's defenses. So, you just use those numbers depending on the die in order to help interpret how it unfolded. And you can interpret it however you like. The benefit is that you have the themes to fall back on if you desire to, in order to interpret the outcome of the die roll. If you're just a creative person and you don't want to rely on that, you don't have to, but it's there if you want to use it. And so that's really it. So let's showcase this. So this is the DireLands character sheet. Again, very simple, very basic and stripped down. You have your name, race, and role. Basically just your name, race, and class. And then on the other side, you have your physical, mental, and spiritual abilities. In between, you have your experience point. One's the total you have, and the other is the amount you've used, so you can always keep track of it. Physical, this is your actual ability scores, whereas this is the trauma that you take or damage you take. And that's going to end up being the number that you revert to if you don't want to subtract it in your head or something. So then, of course, if you want to list out equipment or you want to list out any spells or notes, like if you used a healing spell, maybe you want to name it or you just list it out or something, just anything you want for notes. And then, of course, there's just a little die here. So it rolls the 3d6 for you, and it showcases the numbers. So the first number will always be your physical, the second number will always be your mental, and the third number will always be your spiritual. And I'm going to be stylizing these and adding notes and stuff like that so that it really feels like it comes alive. But this is just what I could throw together initially here. And this is in roll 20 right now. So let's create a character really quick, just so you guys can see what I'm talking about. How much time do I got here? 48 minutes. I got some time. All right. I try to keep these around an hour, So let's see. First and foremost, each PC begins with 5 points to distribute. I want to be a sort of a cleric type character, right? So we're going to start with maybe a 1, 2, 1. Maybe we'll do a 3 in mental. So that's 5 total. My name's going to be Adam, because that's my name. So this is very basic, very, sort of simple and stripped down. I'm not going to be very effective when it comes to attacking anyone. And I'm certainly not going to be very good when it comes to any spiritual. Oh, did I talk about damage? Because if you go down to 0 in one of your abilities, that just means you're ineffective with that ability, whether it's mental, spiritual, or physical. But if you go down to 0 in 2 of them, that's when you drop down and you're actually really hurt and you cannot move or anything. If you drop down to 0 in 3 of them, then you die. is that severe. So if you are physically bested and you're just at muscle failure, you can't move around, but you still have your mental and spiritual faculties, well then, your vibrancy of life is still there. So you're not giving up. It's just your physical power went out. Your strength went out. When I was in the Army, we used to do physical training in the mornings, and sometimes after some of those insane runs, I would just puke and I would be completely exhausted and I couldn't move or do anything. I would just have to sit there. And that's just what happens. When you stress yourself physically for so long, you shut down. And so I really want that to be the way that this is interpreted, rather than you only die if your physical goes down to 0. No. It takes 2 stats to go down to 0 to go unconscious, and 3 to die. So you can see that even if you're bested physically, you're not going to be dead. You still have your wits about you. You still have your spirit to you. But if they beat you down mentally and physically, well, then you're going to be out, and then they, somehow they come through with their spiritual attack. So that's going to be your nature magic or your cosmic magic for your mental or spiritual damage. And then your physical damage is going to be, of course, melee type damage, physical type damage. So it takes 2 of them to go unconscious and 3 of them to die. So you always have a chance to keep going if you really needed to. But if you are at physical, if any of your stats are at 0, the only one of them are at 0, for example, it's fine. Just make sure that you have someone around to help you out, because if you're at 0 physical, you're not going to be able to walk around by yourself. You're going to have to lean on someone. They're going to have to help carry you. If you're down at 0 mental, you're just completely frazzled and you can't focus, and you're just sort of completely out of it mentally. Just sort of phased, just shell shock or something. If you're out of it spiritually, well, then you're having an existential crisis of heart, and you can't seem to focus or respond when someone's trying to talk to you. So just, you can color it however you want to color it in your own play style, but that's the theme that I'm looking for. All right, so what race do I want to do? Because each race gives you abilities here. I'm going to be a cleric of Bressus. So I'm going to be a human, a civilized human. So a priest, which is the core class for the refined, which is Bressus, would be a cleric. And so my role would be cleric. So I get the +1 in physical from being a human. So I have a 2 in my physical. And then for the priest, I get +1 spiritual. Oh, I don't know why I put 3 in mental. I meant to do spiritual. So now I have 4 in that, because you get a +1 in spiritual for being a priest, +1 in physical for being human, and you can kind of see how it shakes out. Now, if I wanted to improve my mental, I only need to do 3. 3 points over that. If I wanted to improve my physical, I'd have to do 6 points, experience points, to get it up to 3. And if I wanted to improve my spiritual, it would take me 12, just a lot to get there. But that just speaks to slowing down advancement to make sure that you have longevity in your play. Because let's be honest, once people get to end caps in games, they don't want to play anymore. I mean, and most DMs don't want to run games at end level caps. It's really the first 6 levels is sort of the sweet spot. And so I want to extend the time that you're in those first, early phases of the game as much as possible. Though through the course of campaigns, you will max out in 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 different abilities, depending. All right, so equipment, I'm clearly going to be wanting to be armored up, so I'm going to put some chainmail. It doesn't matter if you want plate or chain. It's not really, I'm not keeping track of money. This is just for role-playing, and it's just for fun. It's supposed to be stripped down, so I just want the visual aesthetic of chain and a helmet. So I get my +1 for my chain, and then I'm going to have a mace. Nah, I'll have a morning star. So I'm going to use a morning star and a +1. So I don't care. I'm not worried about if you want to use cosmic magic, like be a magi, wizard or something, and you want to wear armor, I don't care. That's fine. It's not important in this game. Not in DL6. If you want to play DireLands in a different game setting, then yeah, it's going to be important, because that's what that game system tells you, there's restrictions depending on the systems. In DL6, I don't care. If you want to wear plate armor and be a wizard, then that's cool. You're only going to get a +1, so it's really more for role-playing than it is for actual defense. And we just, it's just part of the role-playing flair and color of the character. And then any other notes, I'm going to use, this line is not supposed to be there, but I can't seem to get Roll20 to make it not appear. I can do it in straight HTML, but when I import it into Roll20, it doesn't let me hide it for some insane reason. So my notes are, I'm from Bressis, born in Bressis, schooled in, what's the name of this city here? Let me look. My campaign source book real quick, just so I can have it. And organizations of Kiert Vonig. Where's some places I can go here? All right, well, this is taking a little bit more time than I wanted it to. Brest's primary cities, we'll say Lahore is where I was schooled. So I was schooled in Lahore, and that's where I'm going to start my adventures. I have been trained in the gods since childhood, and I harness the power of the gods in order to cast my spells, heal people, bless people, and so on and so forth. One thing that I like about a simple point-based system of a +1 through 4, not only is this a low-powered world gaming system, so it's really not going to have that big of an effect, but you just imagine what you want to do. You don't have to refer to like massive spell lists. So if you want to heal someone, if you want to improve one of their ability scores for a period of time, for a round, if you want to darken the sky, you just refer to the game master and the player and let them work out what type of plus or minus that would be out of the 5 and just come down with that. You're going to have to think about duration and effect, but you can come up with that pretty quickly as a DM. If you want to completely black everything out around the entire area, like a darkness spell, for example, that would probably be like a 2 for an area of like a 15-foot square. If you want to do like an entire battlefield, well, that would probably be a 5. That's going to be very, very difficult to do. If you wanted to improve a fighter's physicality by 1, not healing them, but just give them a +1 boost for a round, well, that would just be a 1. It's that simple. So, it's like a bless, for example. So it comes down to the color, comes down to an interpretation, and just comes down to fun. All right. And so that's kind of it. And so, for example, I want to, I'm going to use my Morning Star and I'm going to smash a goblin across the face. So I'm going to roll the same 3 to 6 for the goblin, just so you know. But first I'm going to roll for me. So I did a 9 plus the 1 for the Morning Star. So I rolled a 10. The goblin's defending with, oh no. Oh my gosh, with a 16. Now you can see the physicality differences. Now I was relying on my mental fortitude to really work out, but spiritually my heart wasn't into harming this creature for some insane reason. And right now I'm just interpreting the dice right here, the 1, 6, and 2. And my physicality was on par with what I can bring to the table. So the goblin, with his 5 of physicality, was clearly ready for me to attack it. He moved away, used his staff, and battered my Morning Star to the side. And he ended up moving in and striking me instead of me actually striking him. Now, the damage the goblin does is 5 plus his weapon, so it's 6. My chain armor absorbed 1, so that's 5. So my physicality drops down. It would be -3, but we don't deal with negatives. So now I have a 0 physicality. 1 shot kicked my tuchus. I didn't do the 2 of my physicality number, so the spare 2 wouldn't have mattered. So he would have done 6 damage, subtract the 2, which is 4 damage, subtract my physical 2, which is 2 damage. So I just dropped down to 0 in that one attack back and forth, and he bested me. So next time I'm going to stand behind a meat shield and not try to attack a goblin myself. The randomness of the die are going to heavily affect the outcome of this, in addition to how you have improved your ability scores over time. So you do have to kind of think, and this might not be the best way to do the game for DL6. This is just how I'm interpreting it right now, and through playtest we'll work out kinks. And but you can basically get the gist of it from this, I think. So let me know what you guys think. Is this too simplistic? Is it complicated with 3 dice? I'm going to have the dice, like, sort of color-coded and labeled and stuff, so it's easier to tell if you don't want to look at your character sheet and then look at the order of the number, or just remember the order of the 3 ability stats. But it's meant to be very simple and stripped down, so you can just jump in and play really quickly. Let me know your thoughts. If you have suggestions for improvements, I'm always open to listening to them. So clearly, this is just this initial, V1 of DL6 as I've been brainstorming it. So let me know your thoughts, and it will probably go into help shaping the end result of DL6 for DireLands. But again, this is a system agnostic game fantasy campaign setting, so you do not have to rely on this game system. If you want to use D&D, if you want to use Pathfinder, if you want to use World of Darkness storyteller system, by all means, do whatever you have fun with and just play it and have fun. Because that's the whole point of all of this, is just to have fun. All right, well, thank you guys so much for watching today's DireLands Fantasy Campaign Setting DL6 Game System episode. Please consider subscribing to this YouTube channel if you haven't already. Like and comment on the video, and always remember that evil spelled backwards is live. So get out there and be evil.